Good evening, universe. Tonight I'm going to be talking all about all the books that didn't really work for me in 2021. These are going to be all of my DNFs, the books that I didn't finish, as well as the books that I did finish but that were disappointments and so I won't be continuing with the series, that sort of thing. Disclaimer, I am extremely affected by space and life events that are going on concurrently with the books that I'm reading. So it's possible that some of these didn't work for me just because of whatever I happened to have going on at the time that I was reading them. But also I'll definitely try to have specific reasons for why something didn't work for me. But I just wanted to say that because it might not be the book's fault. I'm going to be starting with all of my DNFs and I'll be ending with some books that I did finish but that I thought were really disappointing after I was done with them. Other than that, the only order is chronological, so this is the order in which I attempted to read these books. The first book that I DNF'd in 2021 was The Beautiful by Renee Ahdieh. I picked this book up because the author had been hyped up by several other authors that I really enjoy, and I liked the concept. It's a vampire story kind of told in historic France, and so I thought it was going to have these kind of dark but glamorous, slightly historical sort of vibes, and so I was really interested in that. I also really love vampires, and I was really excited to check out more vampire stories. This one had been brought up really positively in other bookish kinds of spaces. The cover is also beautiful, and I also thought the title, The Beautiful, was really nice. And so I was really interested in picking this book up. Unfortunately, when I actually started reading it, it just was not working for me. I got about maybe 80 to 100 pages in. Something about the writing style just really I was not connecting to. I felt like it was really repetitive and not in an artful, careful kind of way, but in a way that I felt a little bit talked down to. It sort of slowed the pace of the story. I had known going into it that this one would be a little bit less on the vampire side of things, and I would have totally been okay with that if I had been really interested in the setting or the characters, but none of those things really called out to me. I think the main character's name was maybe Celine, and I know she had some friends. There were some other people that she was interacting with, and I vaguely remember that, but I don't really remember much about their personalities. There wasn't anything particularly striking. Because of those things, I really couldn't get into the story. I tried one last time to pick it up and see, okay, maybe it's gonna hook me, maybe it's gonna get me here, and it still didn't. After that last attempt, I just put it down and I decided not to pick it back up and read something else. The next book that I ended up setting down was Smoke and Mirrors by Neil Gaiman. This is a collection of short stories, and I believe they're from fairly early on in his career. He has a little foreword that kind of describes where he was in life with each of these, and it seems like it was quite early on, and maybe that's why it just didn't work for me. There were a couple of short stories that I really enjoyed, but a lot of them were starting to feel like a slog. I also am not a huge fan of short stories to begin with. I like things that are a little bit bigger and deeper that I can really dig into. There are some short stories in general that work for me, but these ones were just not doing it. I really didn't feel like picking through all of these stories that I mostly wasn't connecting with in order to find a couple that I really enjoyed. In general, these were kind of the magical realism inspired type stories where there's a contemporary situation and then there's some kind of surrealist magical element. Neil Gaiman seems to be really fond of doing those in his short stories and sometimes in his longer novels as well. While I'm a fan of some of his works, these stories were just not appealing to me, and so I decided to not continue with them. This next book is much closer to my general reading taste, so I thought for sure it was going to be a hit with me. It is a young adult fantasy. It is called These Feathered Flames by Alexandra Overy. I am a huge fan of YA fantasy, so I thought for sure that I was going to enjoy this or at least want to finish it, especially because it's about two sisters and has dual POVs. I really like books that delve into sibling relationships and things like like that. So I was really excited to check it out. It also seemed to be, from the character spellings of the names and the general atmosphere, it seemed to be Russian or Slavic inspired. And this is one of those ones that I really get the sense that if I had maybe been in a different state of mind when I had been reading it, then maybe I would have enjoyed it more and at least would have stuck through to the end. But I had just moved for the second time this year, and I was still getting settled in my new place. I think kind of that unsettledness really lent itself to me not connecting with this book. Another thing that really wasn't working for me was how repetitive some of the writing was. Like, it was obvious that the author was trying really hard to hammer home these personality styles of these two main characters, but I felt that it was a little bit over the top. Let me back up a little bit. So one of the sisters is a queen of their nation, and the other sister is a firebird. Not literally, she's a person, but she has like the spirit of this entity known as the firebird that lives inside her. They're a set of twins, and this is something that always happens in their country when one half of the twins takes the crown. The other one becomes the host to this spirit of the firebird. So she's still herself, but sometimes she's kind of taken over by the firebird's spirit. And what the firebird does is go around exacting prices from people who didn't pay the price of the magic that they did. I suspect there would have been more clarity on what exactly was going on there if I had finished the book, but there seems to be like fading magic in their land. So every time anybody does magic, they have to give something up in order to kind of keep that balance. And I thought that idea was really cool. I love it when magic comes with a really significant cost instead of just like being able to solve every problem. So I thought that would be really interesting. There is also a sapphic romance in this, I think. And so that also drew me to it. I love sapphic romances, especially in YA fantasy. So in general, this had a whole bunch of ingredients that really should have come together to form something that I really enjoyed. But like I said, it was just a little bit trying too hard to make it clear what these characters' traits were. So the queen is very manipulative. She's grown up in this court where she has to be manipulative. Her mom is that same way. And so every time that she gets brought up, it talks about her machinations and the machinations of the court. It was just a little bit too much for me. The Firebird, I really enjoyed. I thought she was a fun character. She had a lot of uncertainty, and I would have liked to see more of that, especially because I'm pretty sure she had like an enemies to lovers sapphic romance going on. That was the vibe that I got. Anyway, I think I got about 80-ish pages into this one. I do try to give all of these books a fair shot before I set them down. That's about the point that I got to, and I don't even remember what the last thing that happened was in the book, but I just really wasn't connecting to the characters, and so I went ahead and put it down. That said, I have seen a lot of people who really enjoyed this book. Apparently there's some kind of twist that makes it really exciting. There's at least one more book in the series coming out. I don't know if it's a duology or a trilogy, but the cover on that is also super beautiful. And so if those things that I listed that bothered me wouldn't bother you, then maybe try checking it out. So the last book that I DNF'd in 2021 was actually the last book in a trilogy, and I was only like 100 pages from the ending. The books are also really long, so it was kind of ridiculous of me to not finish it because I'd gotten so far in the series and it was recommended to me by a friend, but it was really just feeling like homework to me, so I put it down. And that book was The Toll by Neil Shusterman. There's another Neil author who I always get him confused with, but yes, this is Neil Shusterman, The Toll, the third book in the arc of a Scythe. I read Scythe and the second book, which I cannot remember the name of right now, Thunderhead. So I read Scythe, I really enjoyed it. I read Thunderhead, I enjoyed it, and I started reading The Toll. It took me a long time to dig into it. I borrowed it from my friend who had recommended it to me. Like I said, I was about 100 pages from the ending, and if you've seen the book, it's like 600 pages long or something like that. I think the concepts were really cool and interesting. If you don't know, Arc of a Scythe is essentially about like a dystopian, utopian future where we have conquered death. People don't die anymore. They can be like infinitely resurrected. And so to cull population growth, there are these people called scythes, and they go around and their job is to kill people. And if you get killed by a scythe, you can't be resurrected. None of it is magic. It's all very like scientific. Like the reason that people can be resurrected is because their brains are like downloaded into the cloud, which becomes sapient and is known as the Thunderhead. And so Scythe follows two up-and-coming scythes, Citra and Rowan. It's hard to talk about these books without spoiling the first one, but essentially, as there always is, there were some problems in their utopian society, and so it's them trying to deal with these problems. Now, I felt like the concepts, like I said, were super interesting and super engaging, but one spot where it didn't really connect for me were the characters. Like, the plot was interesting, and the writing style was engaging, and there were some really good like philosophical elements to the books, but I just could not super get into the characters, and that was something that I noticed even with the first book. I enjoyed them enough to finish the first book, but I didn't really super connect with either Citra or Rowan or any of the supporting cast. Then the second book has more characters introduced. The focus gets larger and spans out to the world, as second books are known to do, and introduced more and more characters, and I didn't connect to any of them either. And then the third book started doing the same thing. And for me, since a lot of what had drawn me to the series in the first place were the concepts and ideas, and there was less of a focus on that and more of a focus on how do we wrap this series up with some semblance of a plot, I also was not really a fan of the villain. In a lot of ways, he felt cartoonishly evil. While I know that these types of people can come to power and be a real problem in real life, it just wasn't working for me. We had too much of the villain for me to not understand him. Like I said, the books were also really long, and it felt like they felt really dragged out to me. I'm okay with reading long books. I have no problem with them at all. I love long books, but I felt like it was not deliberate. It felt like things just kind of kept happening that were not really connected to the plot and were not really like fleshing out that much of the world, or that it took a long time to get to where we were going in a way that wasn't necessary. It just felt too long-winded to me, and because of that, I really didn't feel like sticking around to the end. I did, however, have my friend explain all the things that happened to me. After knowing how it ended, I'm still not really sorry that I didn't finish it. And then the last thing I read in 2021 that was kind of a disappointment to me is actually the first two books of a series, and I will not be continuing with the series because the second book was such a disappointment, and these are The Inheritance Games by Jennifer Lynn Barnes. These have been really big on BookTube thanks to Read with Cindy and some other readers, as well as I think Book Talk, which I'm not really on, but I'm pretty sure it's been popular there as well. A lot of people seem to really love them, and I was one of those people with the first book. It's a little bit out of my usual genre. I usually like to read fantasy, either adult, YA, or middle grade, and this isn't any of those. It's a mystery. Maybe that's why I had like slightly less patience for some of the things that I felt went wrong in the second book. But essentially what it's about, if you somehow haven't heard, is this young girl, our main character, is written into the will of a billionaire who she's never met. As far as she knows, she's never had any contact with him, so she doesn't understand why she's been written into this will, and she gets like the majority of the money while the rest of his family gets a pittance, basically barely anything. So they're all furious with her. Everybody wants to know how she got all this money, why she was chosen to be the inheritor, and that's what the mystery is about. It's unfolding that mystery while also living in the Hawthorne Manor, which is this huge house, and because the billionaire, Tobias Hawthorne, really loved like games and riddles and things like that, he has this weird house full of secret passageways and trapdoors and all the fun stuff that you love in a mystery novel. At the end of the first book, we are presented with a secondary mystery, and I was really excited to dive in, see where else it takes us, because in the first book there were tons of twists. There's like a love triangle, There's all sorts of really interesting elements, and I loved all of them. So the second book I did finish, and I was mostly enjoying. And then we got to the end, and there were some things that were small that were bothering me throughout the reading of the book. And then when we got to the end, it was so unsatisfying that it like undid all of the enjoyment that I had from the rest of the book. And it kind of brought the problems that I had with it into like sharper light. Now, I've heard that the author originally intended this to be a duology and then changed that so that now it's a trilogy, probably because the book series was so popular and successful. But I think that is really obvious in the reading of the second book, especially at the ending, because the ending both felt like it wrapped up too much stuff to be the second book in a trilogy, but also not enough stuff to be an ending of a duology, if that makes sense. Like, most of the things were tied up, but there's like a couple of lingering mysteries, but seemingly not enough to push a whole book through. Also, like I said, there's a love triangle. I really did not like or understand the ship that the character ends up going with, because that's one of the things that happens at the end of this book, is that she chooses a partner. And I did not understand why she chose this partner. I did not feel compelled by this romance. I was just super confused and baffled, and the ending seemed like it came out of nowhere. Like, the first 60% of the book was them building up these mysteries and seemingly guiding you in one direction. And then the last 40% of the book, it's probably closer to like 70-30. So the last like third of the book is much faster paced, and it's like, here are all the answers. Boom, 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 boom. This is why everything is wild like this. And then also here she's with the person. I did not like that. I thought the pacing was weird. Didn't like who she ended up with, and I don't understand, because the book tries to frame it like these things that happened are what pushed her into getting into a romance with this person, and I just did not see that reflected through the rest of the story at all. I kind of get it, but I wasn't convinced. Additionally, another thing that I didn't really like about the second book was the way that the twists were pulled off. So just like the first one, this one was very twisty, and maybe I was just getting like too much all at once, but it really felt like things were being set up just intentionally to lead you astray, and then there would be a twist that didn't really make sense just to like throw off the reader. You would have all these clues that lead to, oh, like this is definitely gonna be what's going on here, but then instead it's this way more obscure, complicated, and unlikely situation. And it was very unsatisfying. There was also this part where the main character gets grievously injured, and there's definitely like a scene where she's healing, but I really felt like they did a disservice to the amount of healing that would have to be done for an injury of this nature. It's not like she just like jumps up and brushes it off or anything like that, but there would have been a lot more problems, I think, than they really showed in the book. Like, she would have been left with a whole bunch of scar tissue, I think. There's no mention of that at all. There were just a lot of points in the book that felt like it was harder for me to suspend my disbelief, and they were kind of dull and lifeless and really for the sake of drama more than they were for the sake of like telling the story. I don't know how to describe that, because I understand that the story is about the drama and the twists and everything like that, but it felt disingenuous somehow. Because of that, I will not be continuing with the series. I just felt so disappointed because I was so excited to like a book that wasn't fantasy, and then it did me like this, and it was a tragedy. That said, I really did enjoy the Inheritance games, so I will be trying more mysteries. Please comment if you have any recommendations for other mysteries that you think I would like. So those were all the things I read in 2021 that just did not work for me. I hope you enjoyed hearing about them. I don't like to be super negative, and keep in mind, of course, like I said, that a lot of times this is just me not working for stuff. So if you were planning to pick up one of these books, probably still pick it up anyway. And if you disagree with me, please leave your arguments, especially with some of the DNFs. Let me know if I should have finished it. I would love to hear your opinions. So thank you so much for watching, and have a beautiful night, universe.